Hello everybody and welcome to another video in the Student Exemplar series. If you've completed a piece of literature work that's achieved really high marks, send it to me, info@mrbruff.com, and if it's used in a video, I'll send you my ebook guide to literature and language completely free. This is Catherine's piece of work, Poetry, Power and Conflict, comparing the horror of war in War Photographer and one other poem. So let's jump right into the answer. The poem War Photographer presents how the photographs taken do show the true horrors of war, but the impossibility comes when people cannot accept beyond a very superficial level the reality of war. Through a number of devices, she presents how the public appear distraught about the suffering of war before they carry on with their ordered lives. Bayonet Charge similarly shows how war is indescribable for both the public, the government, and even for himself, as he had not fought in the wars. So for me, this is a slightly long introduction. There are no marks for an introduction. I would have probably tried to make it a little bit more concise, saying, something like both War Photographer and Bayonet Charge aim to present the true horror of war, but struggle to do so for different reasons, or something like that, and then I would have got right into the answer. But it does jump right into a really nice analysis of the rhyme scheme here. War Photographer makes use of a fixed rhyme scheme consisting of 4 stanzas, concluding with an A, B, B, C, D, D rhyme scheme. Through this rigid rhyme structure, Duffy is trying to impose order in the midst of chaos, which is juxtaposed to the reality that suffering cannot be controlled. The effect of this continuous structure is that the reader can recognize how the photographer's efforts are futile. This is further developed through the cyclical structure used, which shows the photographer beginning in his darkroom and ending going back out on the aeroplane to the war zone, which presents his job as fate, with there being no escape from the futility of his job. People who sanitize the photographs then carry on with the order of their life. This contrasts to the structural and linguistic spiral used in Bayonet Charge, which causes overwhelming difficulty for the reader in understanding the horrors of war and the difficulty of the soldiers as they struggle to read the poem in the same way the soldiers struggle to fight each day. Now, let's think about this paragraph. Okay, there are a few things going on in this paragraph. A number of you have said to me, can you upload pieces of work that aren't the highest standard that none of us could achieve, but it's sort of, more kind of middle of the line with some great moments and some to improve upon. And I think this is a great example of that. First off, we always have to look back at the question, the horror of war. And this is something that I've done, all the way up to my degree. I'm constantly, every paragraph, literally looking back at the question and asking myself, okay, am I focused on the question here? So basically what's happening is, the beginning of this paragraph is saying, right, the fixed rhyme scheme is trying to impose order on the horror of war, but it is impossible to do so. So I like that idea. And also the cyclical structure means that it is inescapable. So I kind of like the two ideas there of the structure trying to sort of contain the true horrors, but being unable to. So that's good. Then there's a rush in Bayonet Charge where it says the structural and linguistic spiral used in Bayonet Charge, and we have no idea then what that is. So I quickly looked out at the next paragraph to think, is that going to be fully explained there? But it's not. So I like what's written about War Photographer, although I think it needs to be a little bit more tightly and concisely focused on the question. Every time you write about something, so when it's about the rhyme scheme, make it clear about how that's about the horrors of war. When it's about the cyclical structure, make it clear how that's about the horrors of war. But there was an undeveloped moment, as if the examiner should think, oh yeah, I know what you mean by the structural and linguistic spiral in Bayonet Charge. And there's never a point where you should assume that the examiner knows what you mean. In War Photographer, the writer uses the imagery of war graves set out in ordered rows to present how they are sanitized to make war look pretty, whereas in reality war cannot be ordered and is anything but pretty. And this can present how important it is that the photographer takes the pictures in order to show the reality of the horrors of war. Powerful religious imagery is also used effectively throughout the idea of a mass, which presents the solemnness of his job, but perhaps alternatively is used ironically to present how there is nothing religious or spiritual about war. So for me, if I just highlight this bit, for me what's happening here is we've drifting into this idea, which is very, very common with poetry, of writing everything you know into paragraphs, almost like looking through your anthology, looking at your annotations, and then just writing those ideas up. So again, we've got to link everything to the question. So the true horrors of war, okay, the first paragraph about the imagery of the ordered graves and that trying to sanitize war and therefore the significance of the importance of war photographers, I get that. But this bit about the powerful religious imagery isn't really about the true horrors of war, or it hasn't been applied to the question there. And then we've got the link to Rossetti and the Bible reference, all flesh is grass. And these are things I went through in my video analysis of the poem, which you can check out on this channel. So I'm not saying these things are wrong, but they have to be linked explicitly to the question. And it feels like the student here is drifting into, let me just tell you everything I know about the poem. And it could be just slightly tweaked with references to the question each time and be fantastic. It could also be referenced from the Christina Rossetti poem to highlight how the fragility of human life is ignored. So that's another example of, here's something I know about the poem. I'm not really answering the question with this. I'm just telling you something that the actual thing itself is pretty clever, but I'm not answering the question with this point. Although Bayonet Charge does not use religious imagery as such, Hughes is seen to mirror the style of other war poets who've lived through the experiences of war to suggest that the horrors of war are indescribable to someone who's not lived through it. So now we're coming back to the question, so that's good. So really these two paragraphs here, or these two ideas here, I didn't like, but this is coming back to the question. This is seen when he repeats raw, firstly as a literary allusion to Wilfred Owen's poem, Ilfrid Wewin, Spring Offensive, a writer he admired greatly, in order to suggest that even he cannot describe the true horrors of war. Now, there could be an opportunity for context there about the fact that, Ted Hughes was never in the war, although his father was, and we get the sense, we know from his letters, that his father was a shell of a man, and it, it might be more of a, having seen what war can do to somebody, that he wrote the poem. Although Bayonet Charge, where did I get to? Alternatively, and perhaps more simplistically, the repetition of war emphasizes how stressful this moment is and how he has difficulty in expressing it, and therefore stuttering and struggling to articulate the moment. Yeah, I mean, I like this. I think it's something we see as well in the boat stealing extract from the Prelude. The idea of when a poet loses their vocabulary and repeats words, so the tall peak, the huge peak, black and huge, whatever it is, I've forgotten the exact quotation in the boat stealing episode, and then here with the repetition, it's almost as if you're kind of struggling to articulate, which is of course what poets do. So that sort of shock effect in repetition, I think, is a very good thing to write about. He further develops the idea that this is a second-hand experience when he describes the flame. The use of temperature is clear in Spring Offensive, presenting how this is a second-hand poem about a second-hand experience, and he's forced to use the works of others to express the indescribable horrors of war. Okay, I don't dislike that. I think that's fine. I always think, for me, I would want to explain first how what I'm going to say links to the question, because for me, I'm reading this and I'm thinking, all this thing about flame, is it another example of this kind of just writing something I know about the poem, or is it going to be answering the question? And a nice topic sentence which clearly addresses the question would explain that. So I would say something like the poet uses intertextual references to express the indescribable horrors of war. And then I think, okay, you're answering the question, and then explain it. And the idea really is, I cannot explain the true horrors of war, so I'm forced to refer to other poems that do so, because it is impossible to describe. So it's a sophisticated idea, because there's no doubt that Ted Hughes did link Spring Offensive, did reference Spring Offensive. It would have been an influence in that poem. So it's a clever idea, but it's got to be clearly expressed in terms of reference to the question. Because what we have to understand with poetry is that everybody has good ideas about the poetry. Because we're all taught, we watch the videos or we're taught them in class, we all learn lots of good things. It's not about what you know about the poem, it's about linking that to the actual exam question. So let's finish this answer off. The writer depicts the separateness of the viewer of the photographs from the photographer himself when he uses caesura before and after the place rural England to depict how rural England is separated from reality of the horrors of war in the same way that the public separate themselves from the photograph, temporarily moved but they forget. So again, I would have said at the beginning, the writer uses caesura to present the distance, the sort of distancing from the reality of the horrors of war, and then explain. In Bayonet Charge, the writer does not criticise the separateness of the people, but in a different way criticises patriotic reasoning for war through listing moral reasons such as king, honour, human dignity, etc., presenting how the soldiers are victims of patriotism and how the poem is about soldiers. In this way, Hughes is presenting how there is no moral reasoning for soldiers landing themselves amidst the horrors of war. So there's the wording of the question coming in to make it, linked to the question there. Towards the end of War Photographer, the main message of the poem is summed up when she uses the half-rhyme of tears and beers in order to speed up the pace of the reader, so as to reflect the pace the reader of the newspaper forgets the images showing the horrors of war. She presents the apathetic nature of the wider world when they do not care, presenting how in reality those at home are oblivious to the horrors of war. In Bayonet Charge, the pace is slowed down when he uses the symbol of cold clockwork of stars and nations. Firstly, and perhaps most simplistically, the clock can symbolise the slow agony the soldiers go through. Alternatively, it could present the nation's government's cruel attitude and lack of understanding of the horrors of war. The pointlessness of war is further presented when Hughes uses a pointless simile, he was running like a man who runs, to emphasise the complex struggles and confusion for the readers, so they realise the indescribable nature of the horrors of war. So here's a paragraph where you can sense the students getting to the end of their time. They're thinking, there's still a few things I want to write. I'm just going to quickly blast them out. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. The ideas are very quickly expressed. Some of them would have been much better to explore in more detail, but of course, if this was completed in exam conditions, there's no time. In conclusion, the writers have both effectively presented the horrors of war with Bayonet Charge using complex language and mirroring other writers, as he himself has not the ability to depict the indescribable horrors of war. Duffy presents the apathetic nature of the viewers at home and how quickly they are to forget the horrors of war and continue with their ordered and simplistic lives. So I hope you found this video useful, guys, and do subscribe if you haven't done so already.